It was in 1975 that the Ontario government passed Bill 100, which granted teachers the right to strike. 4 decades later, what has this meant for the education system? Let's ask Theodore Christou, Associate Professor in Social Studies and the History of Education at Queen's University. And once again, we welcome back Janet Ecker, the former Ontario Education Minister, and Ann Hawkins, the President of OECTA. We're going to start with a little trip down memory lane here, everybody. Here is a video from the Elementary Teachers Federation of Ontario talking about those glory days in the 1970s. Roll the clip, please.
On December 18, 1973, 80,000 teachers left their classrooms to protest anti-teacher legislation. 30,000 protested at Queen's Park. It was the first ever walkout by teachers. It was illegal, but the teachers were supported by other workers and by students. The government gave in to teacher demands. In 1975, teachers won the right to bargain collectively and to strike. Peel teachers were the first to strike. Their issues were seniority and redundancy arising from declining enrollment.
I always love taking these walks down memory lane because there are so many people in this province who think that there were no such thing as teacher demonstrations before Mike Harris. This is 20 years before Mike Harris. Bill Davis was the premier. They packed Maple Leaf Gardens. There was plenty of teacher upset back then as well. Ted, let's get the brief history lesson here. Teachers were upset 40 years ago about working conditions, as the video suggested, early 1970s. How come? What was the problem?
The early 1970s, Steve, were a lot like today, where the government finds itself in an era of austerity, and teachers are fighting for their professional autonomy. And in this context, we had no strikes before 1975, but we did have teachers resign their jobs at Christmas, which led the Bill Davis government to institute this committee called the Revel Committee in 1970. Its findings were that teachers should not have the right to collective agreements, to go to bargaining.
And sorry, the teacher should or
should not.
Should not.
And they should not have the right to strike. And that anything that would come out of binding arbitration would only be salary-based, and the working conditions would be dictated by the province. And so in 1973, teachers at 17 different school boards resigned in fall, submitted their resignations, which would take in effect at Christmas time. And so the government then responded by passing 2 bills which would force them back, effectively take away their right to even resign, and take away the right to collective agreements.
And that's when we saw some of those pictures there with, you know what, hitting the fan.
That's right.
What was happening in 1975 where Premier Davis clearly disagreed with the fact-finding commission that he'd appointed and decided, okay, we're going to give teachers the right to strike?
I don't think he disagreed so much as he found that he was coming into an election year and needed to have peace with the teachers. These bills 274 and bill 275, which were in 1973, preceding this 1975 passing of Bill 100, actually, as I mentioned before, forced teachers back into work and tried to take away their rights, but that wasn't popular.
Now, and you were teaching at the time, right?
Just started. I actually missed this. It was really quite incredible. I came obviously from Scotland, and when I heard the chatter about no right to strike, I was really quite taken aback. So I was very pleased that the bill was passed. Bill 100 is absolutely one of the critical turning points for teachers' unions, obviously.
How did it improve working conditions for teachers in Ontario?
Well, I'm going to go to one of the basic ones, the differences in wages between the males and the females in the classroom. In some instances, there was about $400 difference.
$400?
Difference in a male salary, male teacher's salary versus a female teacher's salary.
For what? I mean, for a year?
For a year.
Oh, $400 bucks over a year.
And so, and in those days, that was a fair whack of your wages, to be perfectly honest. Then you looked at benefits. Women teachers couldn't get benefits because their husbands were supposed to provide them for them. So you're dealing with a paternalistic society, and it was time to move forward. The right to strike is a charter right. The fact that teachers had not had that was, as far as I was concerned, totally unbelievable.
Well, there's no charter yet, though.
Well, but you know, it's we were getting there. You go back to the Bill of Rights and you move forward. You can't give up the right to strike. It is an essential part of the bargaining process.
It's easy, Janet, 40 years, hindsight, to come to some conclusions about whether or not it was a good idea to give teachers the right to strike 40 years ago. 40 years on, what do you think?
Well, I think it's a really valid question, because the problem you get into, and I think most parents would say, if you ask them, especially after a dispute, no, teachers shouldn't have the right to strike. And a lot of people say that. A lot of people will push governments to do that. The question then becomes, is how do you resolve disputes? And in the current culture, I think that would be quite problematic. And what you see happen is people say, oh, well, you'd have an arbitration system. Well, we've seen what's happened with arbitration, let's say, in the municipal sector for police and firefighters. And and not just there, but what happens is that you get agreements that tend to be quite generous, tend to be very difficult for the employer to actually pay for that compensation.
They actually don't take into account
whether
an employer has the ability to actually afford
and
it.
So that's part of the problem. So to me, if you were going to take away the right to strike, the first question you would have to answer, in my view, is what is the system that you would replace it with to resolve the problems? Because at least with strike, and again, I don't like the fact that strikes occur. I don't think anybody does. But you need to come up with what would be the dispute resolution mechanism, if that's possible, that would work better somehow to keep those disruptions out of the classroom.
Sheldon, let's bring these boards up here now, because we've got some information about how, since 1975, this right to strike has manifest itself, and this is courtesy of Michael Baker, who wrote a paper called Industrial Action in Schools, Strikes and Student Achievement. Here we go. Between February 1975 and 2005, there have been at least 101 teacher strikes that lasted almost 19 instructional days on average. This includes a general strike by both primary and secondary school teachers in 1997 that for 10 days shut down the public education system in the province. At the start of this period, some strikes lasted in excess of 50 instructional days. And we continue by saying the total number of instructional days lost from the strikes from 1975 to 2009 was 2,041 and a half days, and that, of course, does not include the lengthy strikes that the province saw earlier this year. So, let's get into some consideration of what the impact of those strikes have been on the education system in Ontario. Ted, what would you say it is?
I would say teachers as partners in this thing we're calling education, this system of schooling and sets of ideas about how we ought to do things and what we should be doing. Teachers have increasingly asserted their own professionalism, just as our expectations of teachers to be educated individuals is rising as well. So most of my days are spent in the business of teacher education. And I'm working with incredibly intelligent and passionate future teachers who believe that they are going to have an impact on the system when they come out. And they're excited to help shape the future of education. That wouldn't be the case if they didn't feel like they were entering a professional body, where they had no input into their own working conditions.
Anne, have you ever been on strike?
Yes.
When and for how long?
Okay, 1999. 97, round about that time when we were in.
So against her?
Yes, absolutely. That's why I gave her the nod. The reality is it's very difficult to go on a full withdrawal of services to actually leave a classroom and walk a picket line outside a school. Unfortunately, that was a position we were put into because we weren't being heard. I'm going to go to what Ted says. It's all about professional respect, professional autonomy and judgment. Teachers, like any other worker group, have the right to organise, have the right to justify whatever job action is necessary. No union in the teaching world, or in the education sector, ever takes that step lightly.
How long were you out for?
10 days.
10 days. Did you get what you wanted at the end of the day?
At the end of the day, yes.
What did you want?
What we wanted was respect and fair and justifiable bargaining.
You think you got respect from the Harris government as a result of going out for 10 days?
Well, no, but the reality was we ended up with not having the Harris government, basically. And we made...
99, actually, because of some of those fights and disputes, we ended up back-to-back majority government, quite frankly.
With a higher percentage of the total vote.
With a high percentage, and the education agenda drove that, was a big part of that result because of some of those disputes.
But can I just finish?
Sorry,
the reality is, and I'm going to go there because this was opened up. Some of the cuts to education from the Harris government, they're commonsensical. I'm sorry, but it really was nonsensical. Cuts to the classroom, the revisions to the curriculum, the things that happened, mobilized teachers and made them recognize that they were going to have to stand up.
But it mobilized her supporters too.
They did, but down the road, we ended up with, when the Liberal government came in, we managed to make some changes that took away some of the extreme changes that came out.
Who won the election promising peace in the kingdom and the education system. He had a whole list of things that the teacher unions wanted of him. He delivered on all of them, including very substantial pay raises for teachers. And when he went to them and said, guys, we have a fiscal problem, I want you to hold the line, did he go out and say to them, you're going to have to slash jobs like what happened in the private sector? Did he say to them, we're going to slash benefits like happened to a whole bunch of people in the private sector?
Yes, he did.
Well,
Yes,
no,
he
he
did say
didn't
that.
slash. They weren't slashing benefits.
Took back sick days.
Well, come on. They had more sick days.
I'm just saying,
I
he
know,
did.
but Steve, in many cases they had better benefits than a lot of people who are paying for the system. So it's not a question of slashing and burning. It was a question of, and again, his accountability is to taxpayers, to trying to pay for a system as well as paying for health and having an economy and all of that. And all he said to them was basically, I want you to hold the line for 2 years. And he was repaid with the disruption from the unions that he had.
I don't think we want to relitigate that whole time.
No,
but,
I don't, but I'm just
teachers
saying
would say
that
he didn't make the ask very respectfully.
Well, because, all right, but the debate, I guess the challenge is when parents and taxpayers are watching. I mean, every situation, that the teachers say, we don't get no respect. Over and over and over, we don't get no respect, we don't get any respect, etc. And it's not about that. I mean, there are issues. I mean, parents, teachers, we've heard education ministers, we've heard premiers, we've heard people talk about the value of good teaching, the need for good teachers. But there are major issues that have to be resolved, brokered. There needs to be give and take.
Well, let me ask Ted about that.
And it needs to happen in a way that doesn't do what it does to all kids and frontline teachers.
So,
because it's tough on frontline teachers.
Ted, does a teacher's having the right to strike focus everybody's attention and therefore more effectively get everybody to the finish line ultimately?
That's a great question, Steve. I'm not sure whether the language of efficiency is necessarily the best way to frame it. I think the bigger question is that we probably wouldn't get to the end goal in the end if teachers weren't there as professional members negotiating along with other partners like government and the ratepayers.
I'm just going to say that I think we're mixing two things up here.
Okay.
Professionalism and being a professional is different than being sort of in a union shop floor model. A professional definition of a professional is putting public interest first. So it actually means that you actually sometimes don't get something or don't ask for something because the public interest is more important than your personal interest. So there's a difference, and I think we have to be
lost
careful.
Sight of that?
Yeah, I do. I think so. Yeah.
What's really fascinating about that is this Revel committee, which was considered by the teachers to be a reviled report in the end, actually said that exact same thing, that professionalism amongst teachers means that they basically don't need to go on strike because they put the public interest ahead of their own. And so they shouldn't have the right to anyway.
2 minutes to go. Anne, can you respond?
I'm going to, there's a couple of things, because
Okay.
that's really quite interesting. One of the key things I'm going to go to is teachers are parents and taxpayers too.
Absolutely.
Okay, which tends to sometimes get put out there as if we've got this agenda. The reality is the right to strike is an integral part of the bargaining process, and I'm going to go to what Ted said. That's what ultimately, unfortunately, gets maybe the final piece at the end to get you to an agreement. But it is a necessity, it is a basic right. The teachers and the education system in this province are some of the best in the world. And we're there because we have the judgment, we have the professional autonomy.
But if a government in its wisdom thought, you guys are so essential to the future of this province because you're educating our children, therefore we can't let you go on strike, we need to take that right away, what would the reaction be?
Then you'd go to the problem that Ms. Eckert talked about, the fact that what happens when you go to that binding arbitration and you get the OPP, and what happens from there, and you go there. I think this system is working. Is it perfect? No. But the bottom line is, I know that there are other sectors that are not as high as we are in some instances. You referred to them. Bottom line is, this is not about a race to the bottom. This is about bringing everybody up to the same level.
Whoever said it was a race to the bottom, and whoever said it was an argument about efficiency, what it is, it's about how do we help our students learn better? How do we take the resources that we have and apply them where that makes the most sense? And that means give and take on all sides, and it means putting the students' interest, really putting the student's interest above and beyond everybody else's interest. And I got to tell you, Steve, I have just seen so many times when that doesn't happen in the system, and it's not fair to kids, and it's certainly not fair to hardworking frontline teachers.
And I would disagree, absolutely, because I honestly believe that as a teacher union, as a leader, my first focus is the teachers in the classroom, and that directly relates to every student in every classroom.
But that's the difference. It doesn't. It doesn't.
10 seconds, Ted.
Go
Well,
ahead, Ted.
I just think we've been drowning in rhetoric for a long time. Like putting students first, who could disagree with that? That's a real great slogan, but it doesn't mean anything unless we've sat down collectively. And maybe it is time in Ontario that we do this. Bring together all of the stakeholders and ask, what is an education for?
I have another slogan.
Yeah.
Time has run out.
I love it.
Thanks, everybody. Ted Christou from Queen's University, Janet Ecker, the former education minister, Ann Hawkins, OECTA. Great to have you all on TVO tonight. Thanks so much.
Help TVO create a better world through the power of learning. Visit supporttvo.org and make a tax-deductible donation today.